Hi there, thanks for stopping by. In today's video, we're going to take a look at different ways in which you can add new thread at different stages in your Dorset button. So this may be to simply add thread because you've run out, or to change color. So let's get started. Adding thread, method 1. Simply tie a small knot on your ring and then hold the length of thread to the side, whichever side you're working. If you're left-handed, you'll probably be working in the opposite direction, or possibly will be. And then simply work your blanket stitches, your casting over that thread tail. Okay? When you've done a few stitches and you know that that's nice and secure, you can go ahead and trim that tail end and carry on. Let's say you now have run out of thread and you would like to add another length of thread. You can either work exactly the same way as we just did, and that is tie your new thread onto the ring, probably over the tail of your previous color, or you can use the second method for adding thread, which is to simply hold the thread. So I'm going to hold the tail, and I'm also going to hold the tail of the new color. And again, I'm just going to start working the blanket stitches so that they work over both of the tails of those threads. Now, it is a good idea if you're going to use any method where you're adding onto the ring that you try to keep the tail along the top ridge, because then when you cast and you move the ridge over, you won't have a bumpy bit showing on your smooth covered ring. So again, as before, you want to cover some of the old, some of the new, and when you've secured that a little bit, you can go ahead and trim those tails, get them out of the way, and carry on covering over. And that will give you a nice, secure finish. So as I say, the knot or the simple holding and wrapping are both perfectly fine and will both work. And as with any other Dorset, when you go and slick them down, you can see that they're nice and smooth. So let's say that you want to change the color here. You've completely covered the ring. What I like to do is then thread into the needle and lock the blanket stitch by taking my last thread through the blanket stitch at the top. And I can do this a couple of times, and I can even work a little knot because, of course, we're going to slick that blanket down to the edge. It's also a good idea that before you trim it, you go underneath the wraps so that when you're trimming the end, it's actually more hidden. It doesn't get all fluffy. You see this one where I started doing a different technique? That is still a little fluffy. Okay, so now there's our covered ring. We haven't slicked yet. So let's slick this back. Which makes it easier to add the second thread for your spokes, if that's the way what you wish to do. So here, as I said before, this is just one way, Everybody finds their own method, I'm sure. There's not sort of any set rules. And then I usually avoid the same place. I will bring up the new color somewhere else, just so that it doesn't interfere. Now you can have a knot here, and that's certainly the easiest, but if you can wrap around a few times, around that blanket stitch, and then create the knot there. Oops, a lot of excess thread there. You're creating something a little bit more tidy, and when you trim your tail off, it will be less noticeable. So again, I'm just going to go through under the ridge again for good measure. And so my second color is attached to the ridge. And then I can go ahead and lay my spokes according to whatever design I'm working on. And that gives you a nice option there. And so next, we'll look at changing the color at the center. So I've gone ahead and centered up these spokes, and I'm just wrapping underneath at the back just to sort of secure them. So there's my spokes centered up. Now what some people do is they will leave this thread and place it alongside a spoke, and then it will become fully wrapped, and that's a really nice way of actually finishing off. You can of course just knot it at the back and cut it. If you are going to wrap around the thread, it's not a bad idea to just go underneath that ridge again alongside a spoke, just so that when you trim that, it's out of your way for the time being. You can trim it closer when you've covered it over a couple of times. So let's get another contrasting thread. Let's see. We'll end up with a very interesting looking button. So again, we can just place a knot, and at this point that's probably the easiest. However, you can, if you want to, thread through alongside a spoke just to secure, and then bring your thread down to the center. Now, I'm going to leave a slightly longer length here, and I'll show you why in a moment. And then I can come up and work any of the rounding back stitches that I need to do for the pattern, and I will cover over the different thread ends. So I'm going to do a little bit of this now, and then I'll show you how to get rid of those tails. Okay, so here are 3 rounds of rounding back stitch worked in this new color. Now let's say I want to finish here before we deal with any tail ends. For a really, really, really neat and tidy button, it's a good idea to take a look at the front of your button and what you're actually doing. You want the same amount of wraps on each spoke, but ideally you'd also want the same amount of threads passing between the spokes. So on this last one, there's only actually 2, unless I finish this off, this last wrap off in some way. Now the easiest way is to flip around, come to the spoke that it would have wrapped around for a second row, and take the thread underneath the back of the wraps that are going around the spoke, heading towards the center. So what that does is it gives you your circle that is even, okay? And then you can finish this off with a knot, or you can double back if you like to come to the edge so that it's wrapped around again. That's entirely up to you. Remember, having knots on the back of your button is not a problem. That's entirely up to you. And if that's how you want to connect all of your threads with knots at the back, go ahead. Don't sort of be all, oh, I have to try to do it this really neat and fussy way. I just thought it'd be nice to show you the fussier ways. Okay, so I'm going to do that for now. I'm going to come out again alongside a spoke just so that I can wrap it around. You do have to be careful. Some threads this doesn't work so well with, because what will actually happen is that you will see it at the front. So you do have to be particularly careful with your stitches. So that's the end that we've just finished. So we're going to take our needle now, and I'm going to pull up the end that we initially began with. Now you can keep this going all of the way and cover it by every single wrap. This is entirely up to you. You can also simply pull it up tight and trim it after you've covered it a few times. Now, the thing with doing it there is you might get a little bit of a fluffy end that will show at the front. So take care, have a little think about what you're doing. So let's add the last color. Again, I will add this, let's see, from an edge. And because I locked, the other interesting thing is, because I actually did lock that thread, I can start my spokes at any spoke, which is really helpful. So I'll come down like so, and actually no, I'm going to go work it this way. I think I'm going to come up underneath. You see, you've got options. Everybody's got options. I'm going to come up underneath on this one, but I'm going to leave this one long so that I can wrap here. So you will see a little line. Now, if you don't want to see a little line, here's another option. If you want it to be as double-sided as possible, go through a spoke, leave your tail, okay? So we can't see it at the front. Then we're going to go across and we're going to go underneath the others to appear on the opposite side, so it'll only be a small little color on the inside, and then we can start wrapping again. And as I go around, I will make sure that I catch the tails. So I'm just going to carry on with that. There's our rather mad Dorset button. And as before, I want to make sure that it's locked over. And the more rows you do, the easier it is to see from the back if it's locked properly. So here I've only got 3 threads going across from one spoke to the other. There I've got 4, and there I've got 4. So I can go ahead and come underneath the ones here, and I will go underneath as many as I can to the center. Now, because this last thread isn't really going to be locked in particular, I do like to knot the last thread. So I can trim that, and then any of my tails, I can also trim these. Now it's up to you how you do this. One way is to pull it out from the ridge and then pull on that tail quite tightly so that when you snip it close to the edge, it sinks down in alongside the spoke, which is probably the neatest way to do it. However, you can of course just pull and trim near the ridge as well, and that will work equally. Basically, you want to make sure that you're not getting too much fluffy tail end showing. So there we are. Now, every one of those methods of changing the thread, if you don't want to just knot, can be used to add the same color thread because you haven't measured enough, you've changed your mind and decided to undo some of it, or for whatever other reason, if you're doing a single color button, that's exactly how you can add the threads as well. I hope you found that useful, and remember, knots are not terrible. You can use a knot if you simply find it easier. However, some of these methods may help you and maybe a little bit more what you're looking for. Do please click like, hit subscribe, leave me a comment, and maybe tell me what you would like to see in the future. I'll see what I can do. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.